Here we are on another episode of the Social Studies Show, and we are just beginning after COVID with our first guest, Andrew Alexander King, coming in fresh off of Denali. And if you aren't familiar with Andrew, he is an amazing adventurer, explorer, entrepreneur, and just great human being. Like, I mean, I just honestly, I love you. I'm gonna say that's pretty awesome. I think we should familiarize more loves, more hugs, all that stuff. But realistically, the best way to describe yourself is have you describe yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Andrew Alexander King. I'm an African American explorer, born in Detroit, raised by a beautiful village of strong women. My mom, my grandmother, my late great grandmother Edna, that we just put to rest recently, and learned a lot. And I found my love for outdoor nature when my grandparents adopted me, and I got the chance to go to Hawaii. So I tell people born in Detroit, but I found peace in nature growing up in Hawaii and learned how to surf and climb. So for me, that's who I am. I love technology, but I also love making the outdoor space inclusive, not just for people of my community, African American community, but for others as well, to make sure we're giving the right representation across the whole board to be outside and doing what you love to do.
So that brings me back to one of my main points. It seems like a lot of people always misconstrue what the Between Worlds project is, and they think of it as climbing different summits and climbing a mountain, when really you're talking about climbing metaphorically and really talking about your journey from Detroit to the outdoors. So I think it's best, let's just clear the air and get everything straight there. Yeah. Andrew, can you tell us what the Between Worlds project is about?
Yeah, so the Between Worlds project is this. Every person you see in this world is a lottery ticket. No one's ever asked what race, color, gender, anything you want to be. You're just given a lottery ticket of life and put out into the world. So when you think about it, I've been lucky enough to be an African American born into a developed nation such as the United States. My lottery ticket could have punched me out to anywhere from Zimbabwe to India to Mozambique. And so for me, you're stuck between these worlds where society syncs you up as you're an African American, you're black, so you get this much along the part you go in that kind of staggered system of society.
It's kind of like the race, and like how you have a different lead when they do the example of like how much lead you have for the race.
Exactly. As a former track athlete, that's exactly what it is. It's a staggered start. So my gift and my lottery ticket is being born into one household family with my mom in Detroit. And so for me, it's between that world of where I see myself, which is through that glass ceiling, and where society sees me, which is under that glass ceiling. So the Between Worlds project, 6 years ago, I decided that I will not climb in a country and not just take their resources and not learn about their issues and give back as much as I can. So for me, going through my corporate career, I was been privileged enough to go to college and be the first person in the family to do that. But I wanted to give back and just not just be like, hey, let's go take a selfie on top of a mountain here, or let's go take some waves, and not really learn about the issues and build that platform for other individuals to speak upon that. So the Between Worlds project is, how do we navigate between these worlds together to take that stagger start? And it's not about being the first in that race, but about the human race as a whole. And that's the whole point of it.
Okay. So recently you just got back from Denali.
Yeah.
You just spent a lot of time there, a lot prepared. I mean, actually, I was along your journey and some of the things that you're doing as far as like shooting and training and stuff like that. And you went and you didn't quite summit. But my question is, in what ways, even though maybe it wasn't attaining the highest peak, that you did succeed?
Yeah, so that's a good point. So for me, the whole point of, again, going to the Between Worlds project and climbing the highest mountain on each continent and the highest volcanoes, Denali was one of them. And the highest one in North America, which is the United States, is Denali. And one of the goals that I set for myself last year, my great grandmother, who's dear to me and really, was a big part of my life, passed away during the pandemic. And so I made a promise to my family and other people, extended family like yourself, that I would take her ashes to Denali and put her to rest, because we never got a funeral for her. And so every day I would wake up at 5 a.m. for the past few months and train thinking of her. Getting to the summit isn't really the end all be all. The summit just reflects who and what you are. It doesn't give you really something that you're gonna find. It's not like a treasure chest at the top. It's reflecting your soul and what you've already gone through. So the journey for me is the moment that my family was devastated about losing, one of the wisest, most beautiful people and kindest people in our family, to not having a place to bury her. I said, as a mountaineer, and as someone that climbs and has found peace in nature, it makes more sense for her soul to be put to rest in a place that is beyond where she started, which was in Detroit. And as a woman that never yelled at anyone, was sweet, and worked in the Ford factories and really took all that she had to give us a space and happiness. So getting to the top would have just given people the clarity that, you know, I'm on my way to be one of the first African Americans to ever do this feat. But to me, my goal was to make sure that my family and my friends can know that that woman is resting in a place above all of us right now, as she deserved, in a society that really didn't respect her for a very long time, and probably still doesn't. And so the summit we're 2 days into the 8-day window of being like stuck in a blizzard. I remember sitting there, we're one of 3 teams left at 14,000 foot camp. We already cashed at 16,000 feet. And I'm sitting there being like, we're not gonna summit. It's not gonna happen because we have another system coming in. And even if we do get up this ridge, we have avalanche conditions, we have pretty severe winds, and then we are one of 3 teams left on this glacier that we have to go back through the journey we came, which is crevasses are opening, snowfall. And so that summit to me wasn't anything about something that I didn't want anymore. It's more about like leaving my grandmother at peace there.
So, quick question. I actually, just as you're talking about, I wanted to kind of say as far as relatable, like, so while you're sitting there and you're stormed in and you're sitting in that tent, like, what would you relate that to as something that's you've gone through difficult in your life? Like, I mean, how would you kind of extrapolate that for people who just live like a 9-to-5 life, so they can really kind of understand what you're going through in that situation?
So I would say this, like, in that moment, you have expectations in life, as we all do, to like try and complete something. Like, you will sign up, like, let's say you go into a job interview and like, I killed it at this interview, I've done my best, but you get the call and you're devastated that you didn't get the job. What are you gonna do right then and there? Like, show 'em, like, in that moment, if anyone's listening to this and like going through it, like, life is gonna show you things and put you in positions that you're going to have to, again, reflect deeply on and come back to and come
So
back
it
from.
gives you like a clarity of purpose.
Exactly. So if I would have been like, man, upset and crying and upset, and some people around us were upset.
And that's fine.
And that's fine. That's your thing. But for me, that moment when I, like, that second day of the like days we were stuck there, it clicked in my head saying like, this is where you show the true you. This is your reflection of you. So anyone that's like a 9-to-5 and looking at what it's not like to summit a mountain, your mountain isn't, you know, something that's tangible per se, like, you know, Denali. It could be something like
Just a mental block.
Mental block. It could be something creative. It could be getting, you know, a B on a test instead of the A on the test. It could be making varsity and not making varsity. It can be getting into your dream college or not. Show yourself what it means to get back up when things don't go your way. And I said this to some people on the team. I said, when things go your way, you're gonna see the greatness of it, right?
It's like, what was it Monty has just been saying to the Suns game? It's just like, there's no something at the beach. I can't remember the
privilege. He said, like, it's a privilege to struggle, but you won't find greatness on a beach.
Exactly.
And that's like, as someone that surfs and loves the beach, I would say I love that quote because he's been through so much, and he's gotten a team that is very young to a place
no one expected.
No one expected.
And that's a beautiful thing.
That's a beautiful thing. So no matter what, in my mind, I'm like, he's already won. And that's the way I thought of it as Denali too. I was like, I'm an African American that taught himself how to climb from the struggles of Detroit, oppression, and issues, to now take my grandmother's ashes in my pocket at 14,000 foot camp, go to the edge of the world, a ridge on, you know, Denali, and say, this is where I wish you goodbye.
Okay, so looking at that, and now you're talking about that as we're looking at the shift and how you see yourself as a Black person who is climbing, and we're looking at this whole shift in advertising. One of the things that really struck me, and this come out timely, is your latest Black Diamond video that you talked about, and just looking at the whole advertising buy-in of looking at how people are trying to represent us and our culture and the advertising buy-in of that. And then I just thought it was really interesting how Black Diamond came about that, because I saw a few things while you were filming that, and then how you were represented, and then how you had creative control, and it brought you a creative buy-in of how you want to be shown in that message, and showing a new facet of climbing. So I'd just like to have you talk about that.
Yeah, so that goes back to the root of, again, like, knowing yourself and knowing your truth. And BD, or Black Diamond, that team, going with them, a lot of people ask me, like, why would you go with Black Diamond? I said, because out of all the other brands, they really sat down and got to know the story of the Between Worlds project. They didn't sugarcoat or try to make me into something that I wasn't. They
Or put a label or tell you to be this billboard or jump in this video or do this.
They didn't do any of that. What they asked me was, hey Andrew, where do you want, we want to come and film you, where you meditate, how you train, how you go through your day. And they let me meet the team before they got there. And they let me decide where we wanted to shoot it. And then they also sat with me on a meditative spot and like went through like my daily practice of meditation, which I take seriously, and it's helped me like, show reflection of how I grow. And that representation is something that I really do hope other brands do follow suit to, because you're giving someone that isn't used to having a platform in this society. And I could say that, and I can talk a little bit deeper of that later on, but they let me have that direction. Like, this is the story of Andrew Alexander King, born from Detroit, that taught himself how to climb, taught himself how to pound peace in nature, taught himself how to like not bite my tongue, but take my fist and climb towards a better life, regardless of when a cop pulled me over, regardless when I felt like marginalized,
regardless of running in the woods.
Regardless of running in the woods. And like they didn't, if you read the article prior to that film that came out, 770 Asbury Park, I lived down the street from a pretty turbulent crack house, trap house it's called now. And my friend in 5th grade at the time passed away in a drive-by shooting. And so they didn't sugarcoat any of that. They didn't take it out. They let me tell my story. And then when it came to the film, you saw someone find peace through that. And so that's why when people look at it, you're seeing something that it's wrapped in truth, and it's actually projecting out to like, there's other people like me that are in that position, like I was, that are looking for a place to speak their story of truth, so they don't feel invisible in a society or in that race, that staggered start. They can run through it.
So I got a question for you, and in talking about that, how did you come about finding your authentic voice? And I know that you were just talking about, you just shared an article in Climbing with Kai Leitner, and how you went about like really showing like, and telling and sharing with an audience your true self. Like, how do you find that voice inside yourself and then actually go about sharing it with people and then seeing it through to make sure that it's not diluted anywhere along the way?
I think that's a great question. And the way that I go through it is I've been pretty grateful to have people like yourself along my long journey that have helped guide me to really ask myself hard questions, deep hard questions, and not to sugarcoat myself. So meditation is one form of that, like asking myself who and what I want to be. I'm not saying like, oh Andrew, like you want to be a pop star. Like that is, I don't want to be close to that. You want to be something that is not true to you. So my authentic self is asking myself my own goals, what are they? What's realistic? Are you putting the time? And also the main point of it all is being accountable. I think when you have a voice, people speak words, but they don't speak accountability that leads to accountable action that compounds over time. And when that article came out with Kai, I spoke to Kai and his mother prior to that, and I said, I donate to, part of the Between Worlds project, we donate to nonprofits in each region. I told Kai, like, I'm gonna donate $1,000 to you. And Kai's mom was like, I need to talk to you and your mom before I do this. I don't wanna just like throw something at you. And when I spoke to them, they could know that the struggle that they've gone through, and Kai's broken many barriers at a very young age. And his mom could hear that I did on the other side of the corporate world. So finding that truth for me is knowing myself by asking myself those questions, having mentors that are reflecting what I want to reflect in myself down the road, and letting me actually make mistakes. And I call it sometimes accelerated failures. Like making mistakes and then getting back up and being accountable, like I'm going to do better and hold myself accountable.
So one of the things that I wanted to touch on is you're talking about like the corporate world, and I think like something that's really interesting to me is like you've had a whole long career of this like that, like, and I think most people kind of pigeonhole you as this guy who's like, oh, I'm out in the woods, I'm checking things out, blah blah blah. You know, like just like, you know, like,
that's true.
Just cruising, because you're a very happy-go-lucky, friendly guy. But it's funny because when you're sharing with you have this whole like corporate world experience. like when you went to college and you've had degrees and you've done corporate training and worked for all these different brands. So it's kind of a surprise to me to think of it where you were actually a seasoned business professional who actually finds solace in the outdoors. And so that's become your narrative after like a mainstream 9-to-5 career.
Yeah, and it's interesting you talk about that because like a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but I'm generalizing, people think of me, to your point, as like, this is Andrew King, the big wave surfer, enthusiast, or, climbs volcanoes and meditates. And I'm like, I'm actually coding during the day and fitting that in, or like dealing with programmers and their codes and like project and product management, and then training on top of that. Like I train up to 25 or more hours a week on top of having a 9-to-5 job. And so my corporate world came into, as soon as I got to college, as the first person in my family to do it, I promised my grandparents and my mom and my siblings that I would take care of them. As soon as I broke through that door, that glass ceiling, my thought process was, don't just make income, make impact. And that meant to my family first. So working for Lego was an amazing experience because I got to learn about what's it meant to be copyrighted, your images, your brands, like how brands work together and make an amazing product.
And licensing.
Licensing as well.
Long-term
licensing
deals.
long-term deals. How does Lego make Ferrari? Like how do they make those Batman movies? Like how do they partner with WB? They also partner with MIT, where I got to see like how they make robotics for kids. And then I also, during that time, I got to see how there's a big gap between inner city schools and suburban schools on education. So I got to see like there's kids that are going to learn about robotics and coding in like different parts of Boston versus on the suburbs. And I'm like, okay, these kids are learning about coding at a very high level in the suburbs, while these kids are learning about it way later. And so that opened my eyes to, again, what it means to have representation, not only in the classroom, but also in images and licensing, because if you can't see something, you can't see yourself being something.
Yeah, so it's kind of like everyone's like, you just need to dream and bootstrap it up and work. And like, I know that's something that was really hard for me. Like, again, when I was working into winter sports and becoming a photographer, like I didn't see anyone like me out there doing it. So like I just had to figure it out. And like, I mean, I'll be honest, I made a ton of mistakes trying to figure out in the path. So an interesting thing you talked about is people not taking you seriously about your business acumen, even though you've got all these different types of high functioning business jobs, from Lego to the Patriots to Live Nation. So talk to me a little bit about that and just how people misconceptions on how they place you in the room.
Usually I'm placed in the back because they think I'm young and an African American. I have no idea what I'm talking about. But I actually have 2 degrees, masters, and probably some of the hardest certifications in program and project management there ever is. And so I've been in places where people have not taken me full on seriously when it comes to solving the issues for brands or companies, and later on come back to me and go like, okay, now we need your help. You're right along. And I've done that from people in teams to senior level executives that sit back and go like, wow, you actually are someone that we should have taken seriously. It was frustrating earlier on in my career because I was young and someone that was really pushing to thrive as any individual would. But after a while, I learned that like there's a certain type of dialect that you have to learn in business. And some of my mentors that are just amazing, from being Black, white, and female, have taught me how to navigate that space. And now when I go into rooms, people are pretty much blown back. They're like, wow, like to your point earlier, you said, you're not someone that's an outdoor person. You're actually a business person that actually enjoys the outdoors. And like, yes. And so that has always been something that I have to be very mindful when I sit down and speak to individuals for brands and companies, because they're thinking like, oh, you're just that one-dimensional athlete. And then when they get into it, they're like, oh, you have layers and depth to you, and you can see how business is going to go. And I'll break it down to the CMO for Super Coffee. When I had to meet with them, one of my sponsors, we sat down. She's a former CMO for Under Armour. And we sat down and talked one-on-one. And when she met me and talked, she was like, wow, you actually think about everything when it comes to marketing and about being an athlete. And I go, of course, why wouldn't I? That's why I grew up in business and I found peace in the outdoors. That's where a lot of brands sometimes struggle. And just being an African American, that's even another layer. They're like, wow, because if I was someone that was a privileged athlete, guarantee that probably wouldn't even be something that crossed their mind.
Yeah, it wouldn't even be a problem.
No.
Instantaneously see the table.
Exactly.
So I think part of that is like, let's call it the translator, right?
Yeah.
Where people are looking at and making misconceptions because of you being black or maybe the way you talk. And an interesting example of that is Toby Nwenge.
Yep.
And when you look at that, like he has a certain dialect, a certain way he talks, and he has like basically a street to almost kind of like tribal kind of like dialect of way he's talking about things that could be easily misconstrued, where people like think that he might be like hood or like thuggish or like not intelligent, where really he is a highly functioning, intelligent individual who is working in multitude of dimensions and facets in art and the way he's creating things. But probably somewhere along his lines, like think about how many times that people probably misjudged him along the way and didn't understand what he was saying because they didn't know how to listen.
No, you're right. And I think that's a great point to bring up, because people are quick to hear, but not quick to listen. And that is a very big difference to, again, back to our point of like, if an athlete or individual of color is in the room and they're talking about their struggle, people are hearing it, but are you listening to the words and actually they got to that point? So to your point, like, I love how he did not break away from his true self to really dilute, because he knows at the end of the day, like no matter what happens, he has to be himself. Because if he is anything other than that, if that brand was to pull away or if that company was to pull away, he's going to be only left with himself. So being true to you is the best way to go. And that's what I learned across the way is like, I used to wear bow ties and like, suits to work every day. And people are like, why are you wearing those? Like, I like wearing bow ties. And they'd be like, okay, cool. And then one day they were like, wow, you have tattoos? Like you didn't come to work with tattoos, you should. I was like, that's not how I feel. I want to wear bow ties. I want to wear bow ties. I want to listen to jazz music. I want to listen to jazz music. And people would be so weirded out by that.
Yeah, they want to compartmentalize.
And they were like, well, wait, you can't. And I was like, you have neck tattoos. Does that mean you were like, nope, never been to prison. I just like art. Is there a problem with that? Because at the end of the day, you really have to like push yourself through that barrier for people can take you seriously. And
the other thing too is it's like, it's people coming to terms with their own judgments.
Yes, it's a reflection
it's
of
like
it.
All of a sudden you have to go and like look in the mirror by what you're projecting on me.
Yes, and I say that, and you calling someone out on that is or having a discussion is very deep sometimes, because they're like, oh, I don't want to, like, yeah, you're thinking just because I am an African American and have tattoos that I must have. I'm like, yes, I did have a hard upbringing, but I did go through the proper channels to get to this place. You don't want to know what that is? Great, but by you judging me based on what I should look like to you is showing a lot to me of what you are. And that to me is giving me a red flag, being like, I should probably
walk away from the situation.
I appreciate you for what you are, but I have to go and take care of what I have to do. But yeah, I would say that point is something that I'm grateful for, like people like yourself, other mentors and coaches that have gotten me to be like, when I step into a room, know where my audience sits, know who I'm speaking to. Talking to a chief executive officer, talking to a stagehand, or talking to someone that is working, like being true to yourself and able to articulate what you need. Like to your point, if I'm talking to an executive, short and sweet, to the point. If I'm talking to someone else that's working, like, coordinating something, like very detailed and drawn out. But I learned that going through each step of the way with, like, again, my experience in corporate life.
So I've got a different kind of question. And like, so now looking at that, with that experience and that kind of like those prejudices, how do you apply that in the outdoor world? Because you're dealing with the double whammy, right?
Yeah.
You've got how people see you as your skin color, and then you've got an industry that basically they like to trade on fun instead of finances.
Mm-hmm.
This is a fun job. This will be a fun trip. This will be a great thing. This will be so much fun for you to do. So we don't need to index on paying what the usual going rate for advertising or a marketing initiative or a trip should be for the task at hand. And that's something that's really interesting across the board, not just racial, but I mean, in looking at getting the best people to do the best work in the industry, if you're looking at trading on favors all the time, you're never going to get the best people.
Yeah, and that's a good question, because I think it goes back to what you said earlier, understanding the history of the system and how it came to be. And I understand how it got that way, where it was like, okay, we're going to give free gear and we're these big brands and you should be great to get this free gear. Yeah. But what's happened over time, like again, we've moved so far beyond that, where
free gear doesn't pay bills.
Free bill does not pay medical bills. Free bill, like if you break something along that line, like and you're an athlete outdoors just trying to make it into that space, a few $1,000s goes a long way. And I think that's where, when you're wearing a brand and they're taking a photo of you and they're then putting that photo on something else, that brand is getting market sell retail value of that. And that individual could be getting just the coat that is worth probably very, very, very small value of that. That space I talk about that because it's not just about being black, it's not about just being white, it's about being what's actually compensation for that athlete in case they do experience some harm or danger. Yeah. And what's happening, and this is a very interesting point you bring up, because the NCAA just found that out the hard way, where a lot of athletes now are like, you're profiting off of us at a huge, huge scale. Mm-hmm. And it took so many people speaking up, being like, if you're going to take my image rights, at least let me go get sponsored if I don't make it to the NBA or NFL or even a professional league, I can still get some representation from these small sponsors.
And I think that's something that's really interesting, right? Is when you look at that, of what worst case scenarios can happen. You look at someone like John Collinson, mm-hmm. skier, and he just had a really, really gnarly knee accident where he's like, ruptured his ACL, MCL, rebuilt. And luckily he's got large sponsors like the North Face and, probably helping him take care of his adequate bills and that. But when you look at it and you look at stuff now and you're looking at this indexing of wanting black athletes for winter sports and stuff like that, if you're going out in the snow, you're taking on the same risks mm-hmm. per se as John going skiing, and you may not be getting the reward. And so that's the hard part where people don't understand, because they're indexing on the fun of it. You're getting to go on this trip. You're getting to go ski for these cameras. It's like this glorious kind of spiel, when really there are inherent risks. There are inherent dangers. And if you do get into an accident, what's the process then out of that? And where does the compensation go from there?
Right. And I think that's where I say this: if a brand is asking you to wear something for them and they're then putting that in their portfolio to be showcased, then you asking for a fair compensation, it should not be egregious to them. It should be actually appropriate.
Yeah, it should be a problem. You should be wanting to look after the people who are looking out and representing and putting you on.
Right. It's I always say to the brands, by you investing into these individuals that are being brand ambassadors, you're actually getting return on marketing investment, which they're going to keep wearing it because they're knowing that they're shielded and they're taken care of. The moment you take that, that tree and that shelter away and they feel that they're not getting shade and they're getting beat down, then you're going to experience, it's going to get out. We live in a world where social media is such a big thing now mm-hmm. that these athletes at some point, and I would just say this, you're going to have athletes that are making their content that is going to eclipse those brands on their own social media, and they're going to get ad revenue. And then those brands are going to have to pay probably 2 or 3 times more just to acquire that athlete mm-hmm. because you're going to be like, well, wow, I want you to wear my clothes. But I'm like, no, you're going to have to pay me way more now than just that. But you should have taken me earlier on. We could have grown it together. Mm-hmm. And that's why, again, working with you and working with the sponsors I have now, we're building that space together versus the other way around, which I strongly believe in the future, a lot of outdoor athletes will start to have those platforms where they don't have to depend on those big brands for their revenue.
For sure. And part of the thing is just educating minds on the process.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing where a lot of, again, understanding what your worth is, mm-hmm. understanding having yourself, taking the step to ask for help and to come and say, hey, I would like to learn how contracts work. I would like to know what it means to be, what I sign, what's an appropriate amount, and how does that handle over time? What do I have to post about it? And one post to some athletes are worth up to 4 figures. Some are worth up to 5. Some are worth up to 6, depending on how you go. But again, to your point, what is the risk you're taking? If I'm about to go huck off the top of Denali on skis, and I'm doing it with Red Bull posted on my skis, how much is Red Bull giving back to me? You know, like,
And the community.
And the community. So, and that's a good point, because I'll just say this.
Because you can slap your label on anything.
Exactly. You can slap a label on it, and like the community has to get back. So when it comes to the sponsors I have from like Super Coffee, Black Diamond, those companies know that what I get paid, I like to put it back into the community. Like,
well, that's part of the thing, again, of just paying Black creators and athletes. It's like, we'll go put the money into our community the way we want.
Exactly.
Like, you know, and so just pay the people a fair wage.
Pay the people the fair wage, because what you're doing is it goes back into a ecosystem that grows. Mm-hmm. And so by doing it fairly, you're actually just, again, return on marketing investment that grows, and those people are going to stay with you. And then when they have to like retire and they taper off, the next person that looked up to them is going to step into that spot. But they're not going to step into that spot, to your point, if they're not compensated and they don't feel respected. Because again, like someone says, there's no such thing as a free lunch. That is economics 101.
I just want to run down, like, you know, you were like the Lego digital product lead. Yeah. You worked at Live Nation as senior technical program manager. You worked at Patriots football as a digital analyst. So like, that's a pretty lofty resume. So now looking at that and being able to translate that experience to the outdoor world, to outdoor brands, show it in marketing and show it in a business plan that isn't just a one-off, oh my God, we've got a BLM movement for 2020. Let's do something that's like, it's a lifelong practice as far as business and where you want to go and what you're talking about as far as like between worlds projects and showing people a path for metamorphosis, to be completely honest. Yeah. I think that business experience really comes to key of where we are in the outdoor world and looking at how people go about creating multicultural marketing, doing DEI, initiatives in outdoor spaces, just marketing and business practices across the board.
Right, and I think that's where I was very lucky to have mentors in each one of those spaces. Mm-hmm. Like my mentor, who is a former GM of Lego North America, mm-hmm. Lego Education North America, as well as my mentors at Live Nation, where I still speak with, mm-hmm. or my mentors at the Patriots, who I still consult with.
And these are large-scale projects. These are not small outdoor niche brands. These are huge things. We're talking Live Nation concerts, people jumping up in the crowd.
We're talking huge
brands.
We're talking huge, like
Patriots.
We're talking
Tom Brady.
Yes, like we're talking the craft group. We're talking like that was my first. I won't forget that.
We're talking Lego Batman.
Lego Batman. We're talking, seeing kids use robotics. So for me, like, I look at the outdoor space and I think of those are the same projects where business to me is if you can just switch labels from it and still do it. Mm-hmm. There's certain things you have to follow. Like there's image rights, there's accounting, there's account managers, there's project managers, there's CMOs, there's CFOs, there's CEOs. All of those things. I remember one of my good mentors, Colin Gillespie, said, learn the system of any place you go work for. And what he meant by that, when I was like transitioning out of Lego and I was coming to the West Coast to be closer to my grandparents in their twilight years, is he said, learn the systems. Because when you learn the system of something, you're able to then impact it. And when I look at the outdoor community, I see that there is a system of how brands do representation, how they do compensation, and then how they do expeditions along the term, and then products.
So that's an interesting one because I've been in the outdoor industry, I'm not gonna date myself like that, but since 99, right? So you have this whole breadth of where I've seen that, where here's the interesting thing when you look at DI now, back when I was shooting photos and just started like that, if you'd come in and try to be okay, I wanna get black models, doing stuff in the woods and things like that, most of the outdoor brands would laugh you out of the place because it was so far conceptualized that people didn't see it because there was still such a prejudice. Literally most people didn't even know, because you're talking on the phone or you're doing mail or you're doing FedEx, because this is before internet kind of style like that, they didn't know I was black because I had the name Stan Evans. So a lot of times people would just be surprised, right? And they'd be oh, okay, you meet him in person. So when you look at that and you see how marketing has changed, and it's become this arc, right? Where now it's become more inclusive, and things are moving on this path right there. But I think here's the thing that's lost now, and most people and most brands, they haven't studied the arc, so they can't really look at the speed or the pace of what it's moving or how it needs to go about moving or understanding the system. Yes. And so the thing about it for me is like looking back on it for so long, like I've seen the system and you kind of see how you need to play and you need to move pieces on the board to try and look about how to change and shake up the system. But if you don't know that back in the past, that was even like frowned upon to even put black people in advertising in the outdoors of skiing and snowboarding because people were like, oh, no one's gonna buy our stuff.
Right.
Then how are you gonna go about actually having the legacy and the breadth of knowledge to understand how to change the system, what you're up against, how you need to go and navigate that stream. So part of the things like which I'm really glad about like meeting you is meeting someone who actually wants to learn the system from the past and change it in the future and how to go about trying to navigate it now.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point because a lot of, again, when you think of a system, you have to think of historically how it goes. If I were to, let's go, I'm just gonna hit this nail on the head right here.
Okay.
Let's go to what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma. That system of people not knowing about the history of issues that happened in America, such as Black Wall Street being burned down, doesn't really, when you don't learn about the history of a system that is systemic racism or issues, you're not able to then think of like, how do I combat that in the present time? Now let's go back to business, to your point. Going to people like yourself or my great grandmother or my family, like I was taught these things growing up. I knew about Tulsa. I knew about the civil rights marches. I knew about that because my family would take me to the African American museums.
Okay, and there's just one thing that I want to inject in that most people don't even understand and that most people overlook. Most people don't understand that our parents, there was a time that they couldn't vote.
Yes, and that's a good
And a lot of people just like blank that out of history right now.
Yeah.
And I remember when the whole Kaepernick thing came about, I went back and I actually asked my mom and dad of like, when was the first time they voted? Because they can tell you, like, and so I think a lot of people blank that out. So if you don't know what you've never had, how are you going to go about trying to go fix something?
You can't, because that's where it goes back to what my mentor said. It's like, you need to understand the systems, because when you understand it, you understand the whole history of it. Like, in my job and doing, day-to-day PMing or project management, program management, I cannot create a product that will scale and have impact to create income for any company if I do not understand the full system of which that company is governed by, and then the system how they govern their consumers. And back to your point, now let's think of the government of the United States. If you don't understand how that system, the Jim Crow laws were set up, or how those issues are still pronounced, they're still relevant today, and how to actually combat them using the technology we use, we're gonna be not moving anywhere. And I think that moving in circles.
So going back to what you said about as far as circles, right? If you want the cycle of circles to stop, you need talent and athlete to take more control of their own destiny and their own initiatives as far as that, much like the entertainment industry is doing, like Ava DuVernay is doing with her own film and production company, or the Smith family is doing with Westbrook, or let's see who else, Lena Waithe is doing with her production company. Just things like that where like they're controlling their narrative and they are controlling their output and showing how they're being seen and looking at all the economics and how the business is run from that and making sure that it's run ethically. So the reason that comes about for a lot of ways is people wonder about, the whole thing of more than the athlete and how it came by, because people were, why do they protest at sporting events? And it harkens back to the 60s when you look at things like Muhammad Ali or Juan Carlos or Tommy Smith protesting during the 1968 Olympics. The only way that black people could get their message across was during live events, because black people didn't own the media. And so if you don't own the media, what happens is it's hard for you to tell your story without being misconstrued. It's like it can be taken out of context. quotes can be taken and placed in different places. Things can be edited different ways. So that is the reason why when people like, when Kaepernick taking a knee, it's like the point of the protest is for people to see it. And so when people are like, why can't they protest a certain way? It's like, well, no one's really asking you how to protest. The whole point of a protest is to get a reaction. And so it's just always funny like when people like ask those type of questions. And as you get that, more over time, people are controlling their narrative with the advent of social media because they have a direct impact, direct to their consumer. The message is unfiltered, and people can make their statements directly to the mainstream audience. And it's really interesting looking at how Naomi Osaka just did that at the recent tennis tournament when she was talking about like, hey, like here's how I'm feeling, here's the things that are bothering me. I'm going to take some time out for myself. Like these money in this contest doesn't matter to me for my mental health and my sanity. So I'm going to take this narrative in this time to make sure to look after myself. And I think when you see more people taking the time to look out for themselves and how their message is made, that's will break the cycle.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think what Naomi did was actually something that many people thought to be taken back by, but at the end of the day, it's similar to the point you touched on with Kaepernick, is that these athletes are human. We sometimes really do forget about that, and we also do forget that they have emotions, they have feelings, they have families, and their mental health is scrutinized. And when you think in the outdoor space, to your point, it shouldn't take, I'm just going to be very blunt and say this, I've been doing climbing by myself for over a decade, learning how to surf, climb, and all that. But it took me to challenge the highest mountain on each continent for people to take it seriously about what I was doing with racial and diversity in the outdoor sports community. Like getting up and like, to me, that's my protest. By me standing on top of those summits and saying, there's a big issue here with the lack of representation on expedition leads for people of color, Black, white, Hispanic, and Asian, that I think we should be breaking down. My protest is, if you're gonna see me, you're not gonna see me on CNN with a hashtag in my obituary. You're gonna see me on a summit with people that understand what I'm going through and help me climb through it. So when you look at Naomi, when you look at Kaepernick, they're basically using the sport that they loved and they use for their own piece and saying like, for once, if I don't stand with humanity on these issues, then I shouldn't be standing on this court, period. And that's the same way I feel when I'm outside. So being more than an athlete to me is, again, going back to the genesis of this conversation, is being more than 770 Asbury Park, going further than my lottery ticket pushed me out into this world, and making sure that no one goes through these struggles, no one feels isolated, and no one feels marginalized with the mentors or connections I have, and making sure that they have a voice. And brands are giving them exactly what they promised, not when it's convenient to them, but when it's actually meant for them to speak up and stand up for their human rights.
Well, I think one you're talking about is like, it's like taking brands and having them take the uncomfortable step.
Right.
Like everyone like, it's like, oh, cause effect, oh, let's put this Band-Aid on thing. But it's like being proactive of like, oh man, this might get us some haters. Right. It might get some negative feedback. But realistically, long term, what is the positive that we'll maybe get out of it? And there's a funny thing, and like I actually want to take this back to how we met. Yeah. And it's funny because here's a true story. I was like looking at, so I did a speaker series for the North Face, right? Yeah. And I was looking on the North Face's Facebook page, and on the page, I did a talk with Jeff Staple. And one of the people commenting on it said, incoming woke comments in 3, 2, 1, right? And so you can just see by this person looking at his Facebook page and seeing an Asian guy and a Black man that he was thinking and discounting our experience in the outdoors. And so the funny thing to me is like, you can just tell this guy didn't even watch the show, knows nothing about me, doesn't understand that I grew up in Alaska, doesn't understand that I've been shooting snowboarding for 25 years. The fact that I've actually probably been on more peaks, more remote places, hiked different places and to remote locations more than he ever has. Right. But his classification, Like sound like in living color right there. The clarification of. Sorry, I just had to because it's good. But the classification with him is just saw me as a black person who couldn't possibly know about the outdoors. And it was just funny looking at his comment, and like it was just funny looking at the comment section and seeing the people comment about the different things of what they perceived when they know nothing about me.
Yeah, that's a tough part to go down because, you know, and I'll highlight it from my experience. And I appreciate you sharing that because meeting you gave me, like you said, the historical knowledge that I needed to understand about this space. For me being outdoors already, I already know what it feels like to go. When I climbed Mount Fuji, I was the only black person on Mount Fuji. When I climbed Kilimanjaro, in those Walmart boots, in that hoodie, in my jacket, came down off that mountain, and every African porter started dancing when I came off the mountain. They all came. They came all at the base of that mountain. If you've climbed Kilimanjaro before, and you start to go up the last two gates, they all started dancing right when I came down. And they weren't even like the team that I went with. And the reason why I say that is because they knew that for me to come from where I came from and still be in humility to understand where they stand and be with them versus just passing through, that my experience in the outdoors touched them. So when I look at those comment section and someone goes, oh, this guy is just getting hooked up by these brands because he's black and, you know, he's just someone that like takes good pictures, I would say this: talk to me when you've climbed in nothing and we're giving nothing to climb out of poverty, to get to college, and then climb a mountain on top of that and still have enough respect for humanity to get back. And those comments to me are just like, I say it as rocket fuel. Give me the negative, I'll take the positive, I'll pull it together, and I'm gonna keep blasting off. So you can keep writing it, you're just actually an infant, like igniting that fire that keeps me going. So I deal with that a lot, and I think when you look at the climbing magazine and like other articles that came out, I didn't want to do that at first because I was like, I'm not going to take away from the people of these communities and these cultures that deal with this day to day and that are not from developed nations. But then I stepped back and I was like, who else is going to do it right now? And I'm not saying like Black Saver, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying like collectively, like yourself, like my mentors, my coaches, together, we could all do it. And I think by you all helping me go through it, that I've been strong enough and brave enough to stand up and be like, thank you for that comment. And then I'm gonna send you a note when I get to the top of this mountain because it helped me be the rocket fuel I needed. Appreciate it.
So two things of that, when you're talking about, you know, obviously the African tribesmen celebrating your climb after you finished, I think it brings to fact, like, it harkens to the fact that Black culture is bigger than the outdoor industry.
100%.
You know, and I think that's something where people don't really understand. If some people who like are not even going and climbing the Mount Kilimanjaro or celebrating your goal because they see what you've done and how you're doing it, it means something. It's a celebration of you and the things that you've done, and just seeing someone that they recognize accomplishing something great and the pride and joy that it brings for them and brings to their community. And so for me, looking at that, I wonder from you and getting your perspective is like, what are the pauses we can take with this? What can we actually do to strive in moving things forward in a positive direction and make things better with the things that we're acquired and learning nowadays?
I think the thing we can take away is learning. It's not about conquering, it's about connecting. And that's why I write, I never conquered a mountain in my entire life. And I never will, because mountains to me is a way to connect with people such as yourself and other people around the world, to build a bridge of communication that we can take that positivity from those struggles and that negativity from the struggles and use it to get across and learn from each other. So we don't have to keep repeating this cycle of going through, like, can you stand up on a platform and speak and get the same representation that someone of your counterpart that's lighter than you get? So learning from those individuals in those spaces about where they come from, how they deal with it, is a positive that I always try to take away. And I do challenge brands now to go back to what you said, is take the step. Like, everyone's worried about doing and saying the right thing all the time. Newsflash, you are not gonna say the right fucking thing all the time. And I just dropped the F-bomb. Exactly. Like, you are going to say things that are going to make people feel uncomfortable. You are going to feel uncomfortable saying it.
But there's the other instance of that, and I think people like get so caught up in that and what priorities are. But the reality is, when you look at these acquisitions and these collabs, right? Yeah. Like, there's profitability in it.
Yes, it is.
You know, like I look at it, and they just had a whole like Vans PacSun collab drop with ASAP Rocky. You know, so there's money there, and people are looking at it, and they're not doing that collab because people aren't making money. You know, when you look at it like Rihanna with Stance a while ago and the socks, you know, there's money to be made. There are collabs, there are partnerships to be made. You look at it as far as Anderson .Paak and Vans, you know, so people are doing it. They're looking at different ways, and there are ways to make money. So I think what it is on both ends for Black creators, entrepreneurs, entertainers to look at and understand their value, and then also for brands to understand and look at those creators and talent and find their value and index on what it's worth. If you say that that's your number one priority, make it your number one priority. You know, it's like if it's your number 7 priority, just say it. You know, like it's one of those things of like giving that false hope of saying like, hey, this is our number one brand priority, and then not doing it. That's where the collabs fail.
I think that's a great segue into you said like I agree with you on this. Black culture is bigger than the outdoors. Our culture is exploited, scrutinized, all in the same day. We profited off of, and everyone wants to have, you know, the J. Cole album when it dropped. Everyone's like, oh, did you hear J. Cole? I'm like, yeah, I've heard J. Cole since J. Cole was back in Fayetteville, coming through that already. We already know that. So like, why dropping it now and like your surf edit or your snowboarding edit, why is it cool to you now? Like, why weren't you doing that back when he was already doing that? And where I think to your point is, people are so afraid now of like saying like, oh, you know what, we're gonna make you the number one priority, but at the same time we have other agendas and we don't want to make sure we're not part of that trend. Just to your point, say it, and it'll make everyone feel comfortable, or not comfortable, like okay with it.
Well, understanding the landscape.
Exactly, the landscape. Because like a lot of the times I sit back and I look at it, I'm like, don't put up a hashtag or a post and say that we're with you, but then when things really get serious for us and our community and other people that are similar to us in those struggles, you're not with it. And I think that's where I've been sitting back for a year, and I've been looking like, a year ago, everyone was like, we're gonna do more to be for Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Movement, and for people of color, from indigenous to Asian. And I'm sitting here looking, I'm like, where is the representation on your rosters? Who's
working there?
Exactly, who's working there? Like, not every person that climbs needs to be an athlete, but maybe they need to be in that room with you and not just have a seat at the table, but have a pen and paper and minutes to speak on their struggle.
Yeah, help be a facilitator.
And that's where you kind of like, again, like,
dropping the ball.
Exactly. And like, so when you say those, and you put those up, you're giving people
and it's
hope.
About control.
And control. And you're giving people hope. And when you give people false hope, you give them the gateway to anger and the sadness and the struggle that they already felt, and that's called resentment. Mm-hmm. And if people
don't like that,
people don't want that.
Control.
They don't like that. And so that's why you see people like yourselves, myself, and others. We're gonna make content that speaks to our culture and also opens up the door to make it as colorful as the outdoors is.
And emphasize, like, when you see creativity, help push it along. Help push things, like when you see creative people like what you're doing, like it's like we don't always agree on everything that we're talking about doing like that. Like it's like you're definitely like the nice cop and sometimes I'm the bad cop. But like but sometimes like you just need the buddy system to make things happen. Yes. And it's an interesting way, but also people understanding where that is and how to make it work and the dynamics of flowing through that system is how it is, because that's what makes things go. And like people have like different jobs and different descriptions, but again, like encouragement.
I would say, for the Black Diamond film that came out, which again, that team, Will, Christian, that entire team did an amazing job on it. But I would say you helped me learn where to stand in that landscape. So for you, when we met up and talked, like we already shot together. And so as someone that's been in the corporate world for over a decade and made a career in it, I've never been in front of a camera like that. I've never been in shot like that. But working with you for an extended period of time, by the time it came around to shoot with a professional team that was sent out there, I was like, this is exactly where I need to stand. Yeah. So for me, that again, you talk about where do we take the positive, like having individuals that understand that struggle and pass off that wealth of knowledge that can actually then extend it to the future generations, such as myself and beyond that.
Yeah, help you get dialed so you get dialed in later.
Exactly. So now when I sit down and I talk to people, it's like the same way when I talk about business and like contracts and stuff. I'm like, this is what a contract should look like. And I sit down with someone else, I'm like, this is what you should advocate for. You're not, and I tell them like, you're not advocating for you, you're advocating for people that come after you. Because I remember you told me this, and I always say this to people now, it's like the seed we are planting right now during this day and during this interview, we may not ever see that tree grow, right? We may not get it to like see the full bloom of it, but we have to think at the end of the day, someone's gonna need that tree shade to feel that they can be accepted and be sheltered by something when they feel like there is nothing. And that's the way I think about it. And that's the way I thought of it when you mentored me through how to actually make my own creative. So now when I go on expeditions and go to Africa in the next few weeks, I'm like, drone should be there, camera should be there, this is how many shots we need, this is the backlit, this is what I need, this is how I edit it, this is content. And I think that's some of the positive that we carry forward. And like, that's something that I hope that people really do see, that our culture isn't just a one-dimensional culture. It has music, we have art, we have adversity, perseverance, all of those beautiful things, but you don't need to just tap into us when it's convenient, when you see one of us on a TV screen or CNN or your news network dying or in handcuffs. Be with us now, so when we actually do excel and we do get to that place of prosperity, we can sit back and say, we're all around this table together, we're all in this field together, and we're all channeling the extra for more of the human race.
It's like when I'm struggling or winning, like I need you when I'm just like 9 to 5 doing my like normal job. Like it's fine. Like I don't need like when it's like down below or when the highest high, just keep it cruising.
Exactly, just keep being consistent. I think we talked about that. Like success for me in this space right now and with brands in the outdoor spaces, consistency equals success.
Well, there we go. I think that's a great place to kind of leave it off. And I mean, I honestly I think that pretty much wraps it up.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like consistency equals success. Like I love it.
Yeah. So that's it, man.
Well, good luck on your next journey.
Thanks, brother.
Say hello to Africa on the motherland for me.
I will.
All
I'll
right.
take photos with it.
Perfect. Thanks.